Tailwind. I'm the Pinterest product specialist there, and I am joined today by our CEO and co-founder, Danny Maloney. Hey, Danny.
Hey everyone. Hey Lisa.
Hey, this is not your usual setup.
No, it's not. I am working from home. We're all working from home,
Yeah.
which has definitely been a big change.
Yep.
And so a lot of adjustments happening in all different directions.
Yes, we've all gotten to see a little bit more of your daughter Kate and everyone's kids and pets, and it's what, it's been really kind of nice to get to know people a little bit better that way.
And that may well happen while we're on this too. So if it does, it
Yes.
does. We'll roll with it, and
Oh,
we'll
I
see where
think
it goes.
we are all in the same boat more than ever, which is kind of why we're here. So, Danny, I'm really glad you wanted to do this, and I know that we asked our members if they wanted to hear from you specifically about how to deal with the situation we're in now. The situation being a pandemic, a lot of fear about health, but also a huge looming fear about economics. Like a lot of people have already lost their jobs. So Danny, I know why you're the person to talk about this, but tell us, aside from your work at Tailwind, like what other insights have you gathered from other, like, where's all of this experience and insight coming from?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll preface all of this with the typical disclaimer that I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a certified accountant. None of those certifications. So really, this is more coming from the angle of, as someone who's worked in different industries, different businesses of different sizes, who's built companies and is a small business owner and leader. Really just coming from personal experience and knowledge. My background in a nutshell, I started my first company when I was in college. It was a great learning experience. I very quickly figured out I had no idea what I was doing by the time it was ready to graduate. And so I wanted to go learn from other folks who knew more. That said, I studied both business and engineering. And so I'm kind of fascinated by the intersection of those two fields. From there, I worked at a company called the Boston Consulting Group. It's a management consulting firm. Worked across multiple industries, different types of cases, but a lot of times in consulting like that, you're brought in difficult situations where companies may or may not know how to handle a given situation. You're doing research, you're helping them work the problem, you're coming up with different solutions. And so I see a lot of experience and knowledge from there that even we're drawing upon in real time at Tailwind ourselves right now. So that's certainly helpful. Then I went on and worked a number of years at Google and YouTube out on the West Coast in various capacities, but generally helping to incubate new products or business models and promoting content ecosystems. Then went from there to AOL. So my wife, Megan, wanted to go get her MBA at Yale on the East Coast. It was her dream program. So I said, yeah, sure, let's move back to New York. We went there for a couple of years while she was doing the program. And that was a very different situation. It was a turnaround, right? So AOL was coming out of tough times, spinning out of Time Warner, and we had to do a lot of problem solving and re-strategizing and figuring out, okay, how do we take this great name in the tech space and chart a new course in a new direction so it can ultimately be stronger than it was at the time. And the CEO, Tim Armstrong, did a great job there, and the whole team there did a great job and had a good outcome. So all of that was kind of pre-Tailwind. And then on top of that, there's the experience of building Tailwind. We've had our ups and downs over the years, problems to solve. We're processing all of this in real time too. So it's generally just drawing on all that. And I want to be as helpful as I can be, given that background. So, I don't know everything, but I'm happy to share whatever I do know.
Yeah, and I've been really impressed at the way that Tailwind is handling the situation for all the employees and especially our members. The amount of empathy I'm seeing is fantastic. So, but Danny, we really wanted to focus today because we know everyone's kind of glued to the news, whether we want to be or not, and a lot of the talk is about big global problems that we are all concerned about, but everyone has their own little battle at home. And I feel like a lot of the people that we talk to are smaller businesses. So like we're looking for that information that can help these smaller businesses or even solopreneurs, bloggers, influencers. So you want to talk a little bit more about like why we're here today? I know we've alluded to it, but yeah, why are we here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and ultimately, we're here to help. But as this situation was ramping up in the U.S. and obviously, other countries started feeling the brunt of the COVID-19 situation earlier, and there were warning signs there for sure that we can learn from here. And I'll admit, we'll probably have a U.S. centric view today, just based on being based in the U.S. and being most familiar here with the situation. Um, but as this is unfolding, as this is happening, I started thinking, okay, I want to understand what our customers are going through, what our members are going through. And so I think it was about 2 weeks ago on Friday, I shot out a note in Intercom. I think we have maybe just like a quick snippet of that note. If not, we'll show it in a bit. But it basically just said, hey, I'm thinking about you. I want to know what's going on. Please share your stories. We want to think about how to help. And ultimately got a lot of great responses there. But it showed me very quickly that, like, yeah, we've got to step up and help. Um, and a lot of people were grateful for the help, were asking for help. So I want to say thank you to everyone who did respond. Those responses, even though I got more than I was physically able to respond to, I read every single one of them, and it was incredibly helpful. So thank you for sharing your insight and your knowledge, because it's leading to this Facebook Live today and other assets and programs we're going to be putting together to help as this situation unfolds. So that was one signal, and then I think Elisa, you and Melissa sent out a follow up last week that was like, okay, as these ideas on how we can help are coming together, we asked our members, do you want us to do a Facebook Live like this and just talk about general business advice? And again, I think the majority of people said, yes, absolutely, I want this help, I need this help. So that's why I know most folks tend to think of us more from a marketing perspective specifically, and especially Pinterest and Instagram marketing or visual marketing in general. But the way that I think about it right now is that while our long-term mission is to make world-class marketing easy for everyone, in the near term, I see another mission, which is to help our customers navigate this situation, to help your businesses survive, and ultimately to help your businesses thrive in the long term as we come out of this recession.
Very nice. Yeah, I saw some of those responses, and appreciate people's transparency and sharing what they're going through too. And thank you guys for tuning in too. Working from home, I saw that. Working from Georgia, I know we're all kind of in the same boat. Hello, hello, hello. So let's talk about a little bit about like what we're seeing economically, what we think we might see in the future. I know you have some insights on that. I think there might be a visual for that as well.
Yep. Yeah. So we can start walking through those. Yeah. Let's skip ahead a few slides. Um, so we'll go over the high level economic perspective. So here you're seeing those messages that went out, and you can see, roughly half of our members said, "Hey, I'm concerned about this. I might not be in dire straits yet, but I have some degree of concern." And if we advance again, you'll see the message from last week. With Melissa there, said 58% of y'all said yes, please. Let's do this session, and then let's go one more forward. Cool. So we're on to the economic section. So I promise I'm going to try to not sound like a boring economics professor, but I do think it's really important to just quickly touch on the high level points of what I think is going on here from an economic perspective, drawing on the work of people who are a whole lot smarter on the topic and a lot of reading that I've been doing. And I'll try to break it down just in a few minutes. So if you've been watching the news, you've probably seen or heard a lot about the stock market dropping pretty substantially in recent weeks. So you see there, as of last night, the S&P, the Dow, both down around 30%, which is a whole lot when you consider, how big the companies in those indices are and how much economic value they represent. That said, if we go to the next slide, and I won't go through this whole chart. I know it looks a little bit crazy. But one of the interesting points from an economics webinar that I was on a few days ago is that stock prices actually are not what generally drives retail sales, even when you're in a recession in the stock market. So you can see in the three circled areas, the blue line drops a lot. That's saying stock prices are way down in those periods. And you do see the really big dip that's not circled around 2009, which was the Great Recession here in the US. the financial crisis. But generally, you see that the green line, which is retail sales and consumer spending, it might dip a little bit, but nowhere near as much as stock prices. So generally speaking, people keep buying things. They have to keep living life. We do continue consuming as long as we have the ability to. Of course, I think the exception there is the Great Recession back in 2009, where you can see, it was a little bit later that dip in consumer spending started, probably by a few months or so, it looks like. But there was a more significant dip there. And the question that a lot of economists are asking themselves right now is, which of those situations are we going to be in? Right. So is this a market impact where stocks are going to go down and a whole bunch of aid is going to be infused into the economy and they're going to come back up and consumers will continue spending to their ability? Or are we going to see something more like 2009? And no one really knows the answer yet. But what's interesting, if you jump ahead to the next slide, is that we're actually seeing that some people are doing okay here. And that surprised me a little bit, honestly, when I sent that note a couple of weeks ago, that quite a few of our members wrote back and said, actually, we're doing well. We're doing okay. Our business, because of the specific business we have, is actually up in the near term because people need what we sell or what we offer right now more than they normally would. So if you look at like the e-commerce space right now, it's pretty interesting because e-commerce is up. So March, this is data from a company called Attentive that offers an e-commerce technology product. But they're seeing that e-commerce sales are trending about 20% higher in March than February, which is a huge month over month, change.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really big. But what they're seeing is it really varies by category, right? So certain categories circled here at the bottom, like food and health and pets, right? You can imagine people are stocking up on pet foods and treats and things like that.
Yeah.
Those are jumping a lot. But then other categories like apparel and clothing and sports equipment are way down because people are not buying as much of those things.
Oh yeah. And like Jennifer Laura says, hi Jennifer, so much depends
Yep.
on niche right now. And boy, can't you see this reflected in your own life? I mean, who needs a new outfit when you're working from home in your sweatpants?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think the next slide might show the apparel data specifically, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so here we are in
Mm.
apparel, and apparel as a category is down, but if you look at it, people are buying comfortable clothing, like workout and fitness clothes and basics. So, we all know we're working from home, maybe not dressing up as much as we normally would if we were going out and about our business. But we're not buying so much of, vacation clothing, swimsuits, bridal clothing, things like that, that would be more event driven.
Yeah, we're definitely not getting ready for swimsuit season during
Yeah,
this
not
time.
not right now. And then the next slide is an example of a category that's seeing a huge spike, which is electronics. So what seems to be driving this at the bottom is people are setting up home offices, and they're now, because so many people are working from home who normally wouldn't. Like my wife got me this amazing desk for the holidays, and I finally put it together. 3 months later, but I just built that a few days ago, and I'm setting up my home office, and as I probably should have earlier. But a lot of folks are buying monitors, I'm sure keyboards, if they need a mouse, whatever it is that they might need, in order to be able to be productive at home. What I think is interesting in some of these categories that we have to ask ourselves, if you are doing well now, is this actually going to be sustainable? And I think in a lot of cases, unfortunately, it's not, right? Like, we're
Right.
not
You're
going
seeing
to
a bump there in
continuously.
desks. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to continuously stock up on food. Like at some point, your pantry is full and you have enough, and you're not going to just keep buying. For example, you will replenish what you eat, but like there's going to be probably a little bit of a decline in some of these categories after people have stocked up.
True. Although it
Yeah,
sounds like Melissa can't buy enough pajamas, nighttime PJs to daytime
exactly.
PJs. Can
Yeah.
relate.
So I think part of that ultimately says, even if you're in one of those niches that right now is doing okay or seeing a bit of a spike, one, great, but at least start thinking ahead to, if that spike starts to decline, what do you do next in the next phase? And when do you think demand comes back for the products that you have? So with that, yeah, it's a great example there. Home office pin really took off recently. I think we're going to see different types of content succeeding right now as well, as people try to learn and explore new things that they wouldn't have normally thought of. So at a macroeconomic level, the hardest thing here is we don't really know when we're going to see the bottom. So most of the large banks, this is data from Goldman Sachs here, they're predicting that Q2, which is April to June timeframe, is going to be pretty bad, right? That we could see something like a quarter of the U.S. economy just shut down, go away for on average over that timeframe. But they're actually predicting we're going to get most of that back in the second half of the year and be close to normal again in the second half of the year. That said, and the way, sorry, go ahead, you have a question?
Well, I was just going to kind of point out that numbers are one thing, but it's not saying that every business that's around today is going to fall that much and then it's going to raise back up the third and fourth quarter. So I think that's the big question here. Like, how can we be in that green come the recovery?
Exactly. Whenever it does come, and you're probably going to see the timings a little bit different for different types of businesses as well. So obviously, folks like airlines and cruise lines and shipping have gotten hit really hard up front. Restaurants, hotels. So some industries are definitely getting hit a lot harder than what's shown here, and others are doing better. And so as we think through this, I think what we ideally want to do, and what I heard from our members, is really there's kind of two categories at the moment. There are some folks who are already in a crisis situation, and we're going to talk to that. We're going to spend some time saying, okay, if you're in that situation, what do you do right now to get yourself through it? But then there are a lot of other folks where it's like, okay, yeah, you can weather the downturn if you do it, you have time. You just want to do it well, but ultimately you can do it in a way that sets you up to participate in that green as it comes back. But even that said, the way I'm thinking about this and the way I'd suggest folks think about this is plan for this not happening. Plan for it taking longer than this, so that you're ready if it does, right? Like the last thing you want to do is say, okay, I built a plan and I can make it exactly 2 or 3 months and then everything has to come back online. You'd rather plan to be more pessimistic and know what your phases of working through the challenges are, but then hope that it actually does come back quickly the way the banks are suggesting right now. Because then, it's fine. You did a little bit of extra work on planning and preparing that you didn't ultimately have to pull the trigger on everything. But you ended up in a better situation, and that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, you never regret that extra work just because you didn't need it.
I think within reason, as long as it doesn't cause you to freeze and not do other critical things. So there's even a balance there, right? Like I think it's kind of, you don't want to underreact, but you also don't want to overreact. It's finding what that sweet spot is for your business.
Yeah.
So that said, we heard stocks don't impact consumer spending immediately. And there's also this unknown about when things are going to come back. This is one of the things that I'm looking at the most personally that I think is important, and that is unemployment. And there are some other related, metrics you can look at. But ultimately, I think unemployment is going to tell a lot of the story here, because the big difference between the 2009 or 2008 recession, as it's called here, versus some of those other ones where consumer spending didn't drop, is unemployment spiked really high for a while, right? And it continued over time. There were more and more people losing their jobs and filing unemployment claims over time. And that's where you see consumer spending drop. And so for a lot of the folks who might be on the call today, if you're an e-commerce store, if you are a blogger or influencer who relies in part on sponsorships from consumer brands in order to generate revenue, this is a really important number, because if people stop spending, those brands are going to have to cut back on their spending. And in some categories in e-commerce, you might see a decline in spending as well for a while. So this, I think, is really what's going to probably be one of the telltale signals of how long this is going to last and how deep the recession gets. It's ultimately going to be, how much pain is there out there in terms of folks losing their income, losing their livelihoods, and can we get those jobs back quickly, right? So can businesses come back online, and are they just going to offer most of the people that they had to let go their jobs back immediately? Or is that not going to work for some reason? Are some of those businesses not coming back at all? So I know I've spoken to a few folks on our team here who have friends with like restaurants and other businesses where they're debating, like, do I even reopen when this is over or not? And so, unfortunately, I don't think all of those jobs are going to come back very quickly, but hopefully a lot of them do. So with that, this is really just to say that spike that you saw in the last slide isn't even really telling the story yet. So this is Goldman Sachs data again. They're estimating that once the numbers come out for this past week, over 2 million Americans will have lost their jobs. So it's pretty substantial. I mean, that is an absolutely historic number for a week. I think I read that the highest week in recorded history before was about 700,000. And that was like back in the 80s when there was a really turbulent economic time. So this is not a good picture, right? Like this is a lot of folks out there who are hurting, and we have to be aware of that. We have to help, and that's again why I think, as Tailwind as well, I feel like there is this higher mission in the near term where it's like, okay, we need to help people stay in business, navigate this situation, take care of their families. That's almost like a bigger social calling right now. So, with that, it's plan for the worst, hope for the best, especially if you are in a business that's consumer focused, or if your clients and customers are consumer focused. You need to assume it's going to be longer than it hopefully is, and then set yourself up to be pleasantly surprised if it ends up being shorter. All right, mental health break slide. So
I feel like we needed an emoji on here or a GIF or.
Yeah, we need something, someone dancing or something, right? I mean,
Yes.
so let's just take a moment here and let's acknowledge this is a heavy situation. It's tough. One of the things my wife's been teaching me about over the last year is meditation. And so, you might find that there are some points in your day where you want to just stop, collect yourself, gather, be mindful, whatever it is that helps you. But maybe we all take a deep breath right now before we continue, because I know that was a lot of information and it wasn't a great picture. I apologize for that. But that said,
I don't think this is your fault, honestly, Danny. But I do just want to echo what no, certainly it wasn't. What Michael said, that we're gonna plan for success, not for failure. This is, yeah.
All right. Okay, so we've got our breath here. And so now the question is, all right, if this is what's going on, or some version of this is what's going on in the world right now, what do we do about it, right? And so put together just a simple framework here to help figure out, where are you and what do you need to be focused on? It's going to vary for every business, but I think, the rest of this talk today, and as we go into Q&A, I think really our goal here is that everyone who's on the call can at least find a few ideas, concepts, principles, something they can apply to their own business, because you're going to know your own business better than anyone else. We're certainly not going to know it better than you do. And so, it's ultimately, part of the work here is figuring out, okay, how am I similar? How am I different from others' situations? So if you're in good times right now, right, that's great. Congratulations. We're not going to focus on you a lot today, and I apologize for that. But you're probably pretty busy, keeping up with demand and orders, depending on what it is you're selling.
Shipping their toilet paper, yeah.
Shipping the toilet paper, manufacturing the toilet paper. I spoke to a friend of mine probably about a month ago, who was really confused at the time as to like why suddenly all their hand sanitizer and N95 masks on their site sold out, and they couldn't get any more, right? And we were talking. He's like, "This is crazy," and then obviously we know why. But there are some businesses going through that period. If that's you, stay focused right now, right? Like execute, fulfill the orders, get your customers taken care of, keep growing. Great. The other situations we do want to focus on a bit more. So if we go down to the next slide. So one is if you're kind of in tough times, right? So maybe you're starting to be impacted. Maybe you're worried about being impacted. How do I change my situation? And I think the big difference from a framework perspective here is in good times, you're trying to grow your assets for your business. So you're building strength, building power in your business, and you're trying to gain market share. Which maybe you're also doing at this time as well to some extent. But the bigger thing as you go into a recession, as you go into tougher times, is you need to protect the assets you have, right? Don't give up on them. Don't let them decay to a point that when you come out of the tough time, when we all come out of the tough time together, your business is not in as strong of a position to be able to participate in that upside, that green in the graph that we saw. The other piece of this, I think, is retooling, right? So rethinking pieces of your business model, trying to find new revenue streams, new ways of doing things. Maybe you pivot your business model a little bit, but there's probably some of that you should be thinking about while you have the time to do it. Because ultimately that's going to lead to your business being more efficient and stronger as you come out of this. And then the third category is in crisis, right? I'm in crisis mode right now. And really, number one priority here is survival, right? Ideally, you want to survive in a way that doesn't destroy your assets, that doesn't destroy your ability to come back later. You want to still preserve that, but survival has to be your number one goal, because ultimately, if your family is in a really tough spot right now, that's what you got to focus on first. So the good news, if we jump down to the next slide, is most of you, based on what we heard from you directly, is you're kind of in this middle bucket or moving towards this middle bucket, and that's better than everyone being in crisis mode right now. So I think even taking a moment to recognize that, right, like if this is where you are, thankfully you're not all the way in crisis at this point in time. You have some time to figure things out and figure out what your approach is going to be. And I think there's something in just being grateful for that in itself, because other folks, unfortunately, are not as lucky right now. And then where we're going to start, though, I think is we should talk about, if you're in crisis right now, what do you do to survive? And so we'll move into the middle bucket next, but I imagine if you're feeling like you're in this left bucket right now, time is of the essence. Let's get to it. Every minute counts. So why don't we kind of head in that direction? Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear from the people who are listening. Where are you? Are you in good times? Are you in rough times? Or are you in crisis? Like, what is on your mind? What are your top priorities right now? Okay, so Casey, I've been working on meditation. She's been working on meditation. There's so much scientific evidence that it can rewire your brain, and she's recommending a book called Unplug, which is a no-nonsense guide to beginner meditation.
I'm gonna write that down.
Good. Thank you for that, Casey. Oh, okay. And also experiencing only tough times right now. I know, like, who would have thought a month ago would be grateful for only tough times, but with an Etsy business. Okay, good to know. Good to know. But we do have friends who are in that crisis mode right now. Just looking at that unemployment spike. Yeah. So what can they do?
Yeah, I think so. One thing maybe to notice is you're not alone, obviously, right? So, I'll try not to share information that will identify anyone, but I had some responding to some of those messages that came in. There were folks who said, "Hey, my spouse was laid off, and my income in my business is way down." Right? Like, I'm worried about if we're going to be able to pay the bills right now. I spoke to someone who is a single mom and the sole provider for the family, and is in an industry that was hit incredibly hard, and their income is basically gone. They were set up to have one of the best years of their career, and their income is gone suddenly, and they're worried about paying the mortgage. So let's put a pin in this question about businesses that just launched in the recession. Maybe we come back to that at the end. It can be unfortunate timing, and in some ways it can actually be good timing, which is interesting. But unfortunately, there are a lot of folks out there who are in this crisis mode. And so when I think about what you can do now, and we put together some resources that I believe are linked in linked to from a page in the description of this event as well. Step one is you got to step back, and I realize it's a really emotional time, but I think number one is you just got to take stock of your income and your expenses as quickly as possible. The challenge, especially for small business owners, solopreneurs, is there's really no such thing as a business crisis, because a business crisis is a personal crisis as well, right? Your income is usually directly tied to your business, and so your personal expenses impact your business impacts your ability to cover your necessities and your personal expenses. And so this is a really important step. So I would almost start there, right? Like start with your personal expenses and start thinking through, okay, how do I get through this time? The good news is a lot of the top categories, and we have detail in the downloadable doc that's linked there, and you can grab it. Feel free to share it around. The top categories of expenses for most people, there is some leeway, some relief that is either already here or is coming. So, for example, in the US here, HUD has already suspended evictions and foreclosures for 2 months on renters and homeowners. So, if you are going to have a hard time paying your rent or paying your mortgage because of a loss of income, the immediate thing you want to do, even if it's a really hard conversation, and I get it is, reach out to your landlord or reach out to your bank, let them know. And what I'm hearing overwhelmingly is they're going to be happy to work with you, right? Like it's a lot better for them to know what situation you're in, to be able to work out a plan with you to get back on your feet as you reestablish income and hopefully as we come out of this recession. But that's better than losing a good tenant for the long term or not knowing what their own cash flow is going to look like. Because in a lot of cases, they're small businesses too. Maybe not the bank so much, but the landlords and the property owners are often small businesses themselves, and they're trying to figure out what their situation is going to be. So as scary as that conversation might be, you're much better off reaching out and having it. Some other big categories, I know, a lot of people are worried about if I or my spouse lost a job and we were depending on that for health insurance, what do we do? There's some information on the sheet around, you can look into programs like COBRA, which might enable you to keep your health insurance. A lot of states are actually reestablishing their ACA exchanges so that more people can get health insurance who are now displaced and who need it. But there are some solutions out there. I know it's expensive, it's hard, but it might be something that's incredibly important, especially in this time. And then other categories like a lot of people are worried about credit card debt. Student loans is another big one, depending on if you've got student loan debt. And there's actually relief coming for those categories as well. So a lot of the major credit card companies are now saying we will waive interest for a period of time, or we'll at least work out a payment schedule, or we might waive fees or reduce fees somehow. Again, reach out to them. It's not automatic in most cases. Like you have to talk to someone there so they know what's going on in order for you to be able to get this type of leniency. And the same thing with federal student loans. The federal government has already stopped accruing interest for a couple of months on federal loans. They're willing to give forbearance, which gives you time basically to defer payments. There's an ability to essentially refinance a student loan to lower your payments based on your income level, which might help you save money month to month that you're going to need for other expenses. But really, it's like most major categories here, there's help, there's relief coming to get you through this hard time. So I don't want to minimize it. I don't want to say it's not hard. What we're trying to do here is just share the information we have, point you to helpful resources. Obviously, like none of this is connected to our business or our area of expertise, so you'll want to do additional research here. But there are ways to navigate this situation, right? And the help is coming. So I think that's what I would start with on the expense side, probably. Let me
Yeah.
pause there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can I make this obstacle the greatest thing that's ever happened to me? Oh, Marie Forleo. You can always count on her for a positive spin. Yep. That's great.
That's awesome.
So,
Yeah.
so another thing I think is worth mentioning, and not necessarily for our audience, but maybe for your friends, for your older relatives. So I know of some people who their first inclination is to not trust what anyone they meet in person, and yet if they see something online that claims to be from a doctor or from the BBC, they will forward it like it's gospel. So what you're going to see, and what we're already seeing, are scams. We're seeing phishing on text messages. So just question everything. And I know like you guys are, but look out for your relatives, because there are people who just have a tendency to trust what they see online, and make sure that you're helping them to avoid, they don't need to be any more of a crisis than they need to be. Just help them out with what to look for.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I think the other side of this is then you turn to the income side, right? And I think there are two sides of that coin again. And if you're in this crisis mode, if your business income is your personal income, this is obviously a scary time. It's an important an important time to navigate. So first things first, it thankfully, it appears there will be some aid coming here in a couple of different forms from the government that can help out. I have not seen in the news today if the Senate has gotten around to agreeing on and passing the bill that they're working on. Hopefully that news comes soon. But what I've been reading recently, hopefully this hasn't changed, is that every version of that bill that's being debated includes some type of significant cash payment out to folks who need it, so that you can cover your day-to-day living expenses. You'll have food, you'll have utilities, you'll have the things that you need. So I think that's kind of step one here. Another piece to be aware of is, if you haven't seen this already, the IRS has moved tax day from April 15th back to July 1st. And there's kind of, two different ways to think about that. So one is, if you are owed and expect a tax return, they are saying file immediately. They are going to rush, if you're owed a tax refund from your return, file immediately. They're going to try to rush refunds to people to get cash into the people's pockets, into the economy, so that folks who need that cash right now are going to get it. The other side of that is, if you are going to owe money, you can wait until July 1st to file, and you can delay having that money come out of your account, or ultimately they may even extend that further or offer some additional leniency. We'll see as the time comes, based on the situation we're in as a country. But at a minimum, that you can defer by a few months there and keep the cash on hand when you absolutely need it most.
Yeah, and I also want to talk about the SBA loans that are being made available. After Hurricane Florence, I was eligible for one of those, and it was the most wonderful experience I've ever had with a governmental organization. They were just empathetic and helpful, not trying to push more money on you than you needed, but making sure you got what you wanted. And the process was relatively painless. So if that's something that would be helpful to you, the interest rates are unbelievably low. Just something to look into. And that's also in that resource page that we linked to.
Yeah, I've gotten some questions about SBA loans from folks, and the question is, should I take this, right? Like, do I actually want to take on debt is a big concern. Here's how I kind of think of this, right? Like, if you have a business, right? Like a business that is creating income for you, you're making more money than you are spending, and this money is going to enable you to keep that business alive or reestablish its operations once you're able to reopen, or whatever the situation is, definitely consider it, right? Like, this is about the cheapest capital you're ever going to find. And it enables you to avoid destroying a lot of the assets that you've worked so hard to build, so you can get up and running. It can help you, to provide some support to your employees. If you're going to go that route, get on the list, because they are being overwhelmed with applications. And so you want to get as far up in the queue as you possibly can. The other side is,
they will defer payments. They defer payments for you too. So if just like you can't pay anything at all for, I think mine was 10 or maybe even 11 months out, which could be really helpful to you right now. And if you take it, you find you don't need it because you're finding other ways to supplement your income, well, you can just pay it back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another point that I read, which I apologize, I don't know the details on, but I read that in certain situations they might even forgive some of these loans, or at least some portion of them. So I think that depends on what the long-term outcomes are, but it can be a really helpful tool. Maybe if your business is really more of a hobby or a passion project, and it's not so much about generating income for you, then I'd say maybe think twice about this, because if you don't need to take on the debt, maybe you shouldn't, and leave that money for other folks who need it. The flip side of that is, if that's the case, but you're in crisis and you need this to cover income, then fine, have your hobby business pay you a salary out of this debt money, so that you can get by and your family can have the money you need. And then, the good news about this is they're talking about really long terms and really low interest rates on this debt. So you're going to be way better taking this money than you are going to be, say, racking up credit card debt, which is going to be way more expensive and way more damaging to you in the long term. So the other side of this, I think, is your income, right? So I think of this in kind of two buckets, right? So one is how do you try to save or reestablish income in your business itself, and then the other side is can you personally generate income in other ways, right? Because like if you just don't see the path forward for your business, and I've had this conversation with a few of our members, there might be freelance, there might be contract options. With one person, they were even considering reaching out to a competitor of theirs in town for a local business and seeing if they would hire them on a freelance basis if they have work right now, but their own business doesn't. There are ways to
Yeah.
get creative. Obviously, full-time jobs are going to be harder to come by, but do what you need to do to get income flowing to get money in the door. From
Yeah.
your
I
business,
think
though,
we've all
I'm seeing
been
a lot
kind of
of
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we've all noticed how creative people are getting. I think one of the most obvious examples that most people have noticed is restaurants. Well, most places won't let you eat in anymore. So many of them have very, very quickly pivoted to curbside service or takeout or free delivery. I just am in amazement at how quickly people can um, oh, they can pull it together and make it happen so fast. But
yeah.
are there other examples that we can think about to try to pivot that kind of business?
Yeah, and I'll say there could be long-term benefits to that as well, right? If you get your business online and it wasn't before, you open up a new revenue stream for when you can reopen
Oh, yeah,
operations.
great point.
Megan sent me a link at a local restaurant that we got brunch from a day or two ago, and we had never been there before, but we decided to go do the curbside thing, and it was amazing food. And the owner came out, and they were incredibly grateful. And we will definitely be going back there, when they reopen. So there are ways to still win long-term customers here, even in this time of crisis. And I think a lot of folks are trying to make the most of it. Some other really interesting ideas that I've seen. So gyms obviously have also been put in this crisis mode in a lot of markets. So like our gym is doing live stream classes at home so that people don't cancel their memberships and they stay active. They're adding kids classes. There's also like a cycle bar type of gym that we don't personally go to, but we saw they're offering to rent out their bikes to people in their homes and let them use them in their homes during this so they can continue.
So
And they
smart.
at least, yeah, they're generating some income at least off of that,
Yeah.
which, probably helps pay some salaries for the owners and a small group of employees.
Yeah.
Um,
And like you said though too, if you rent a bike from them and you have a great experience when they take their bike back because their gym is open, what gym are you going to go to?
yeah,
Yeah, you're setting yourself
exactly.
up really well for the recovery.
And you don't fall out of the habit, right? Like I think that's a big thing for a lot of businesses is try to keep your customers to continue using your service or doing something that they do with you so that when business comes back online, this has not fallen out of the habit of this person's life, right? It's still part of their daily routine or even a new part of their routine. Um, One of our members that I was talking with is a wedding photographer, and they unfortunately had a severe loss of income very quickly. But even in that conversation, there were some examples of, okay, I can do different types of shoots, try to get different types of business, discounting fees for corporate clients who might still be doing photo shoots and generating content during this time, and just like getting your foot in the door, even if it's not the type of work you love doing long term. Offering freelance work to others, right? Like your skill is still valuable, even if your particular monetization model might not be working right now, or your niche is not working. So I think there's another angle there, which is how do I use my skills and my abilities to set up a new way to generate revenue, even if it's just for the short term. And then eventually maybe I get back to my long-term way of operating, or maybe this just opens up a whole new avenue of my business, right? So the quote before, how do I make this the best obstacle that ever happened to me? If I might be misquoting that slightly, but I think that's where some businesses are going to see that happens is like, okay, now we have 2 or 3 revenue streams instead of one once we do get back up and running again.
Yeah, Danny, what do you think? And I'm putting you on the spot here. What do you think is the key or the difference between a business that crumbles at a time like this and a business that
Mhm.
survives and comes out stronger on the other side? Is there like a mindset, or what do you think it is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? So there's one, so no matter what, whether you're in the crisis bucket or you're in the tough times bucket, I think there is a little bit of soul searching that you want to do right now and ask yourself, okay, picture a world where this crisis is over. Do people still need and want what I'm offering? right? Is this still valuable to the world? And do I still want to be doing this? And if the answers are yes, like take that reaffirmation of what you're doing to heart and say, okay, now I know this is just a problem of navigating the short term, even if that's really tough, right? But there's something really critical to having that fundamental belief that what you're doing matters and that you will ultimately survive, you will ultimately come through it. And I think where a lot of businesses fall apart is they just either they don't reach that point personally, or they lose hope is another way, and maybe just stop, maybe just give up. That's one of the hardest things to fight against here. Don't just give up. Don't just stop doing everything, because that can be an emotional response in this type of time period, and that
Yeah,
can
but
lead
here's
to
another side of that, though, Danny.
yeah.
Here's a tough question, though. Is there a time to just give up?
There is.
Ever?
There is. I think
Okay.
yes, there is. I think the time to give up. So there's a difference between having a solid belief that you will eventually make it through and having undue optimism, right? If your plan is hope, right? If your plan is hope that this works, that's very different from saying, I know there's a real valuable opportunity here, but I'm going to have to figure it out. I'm going to have to work through it, right? So when might you give up? If you don't see that path, right? If longer term you think that there is a change happening here that and your business for some reason will never come back, right? So in the wedding photography example, if you think people are going to stop getting married and will not hire photographers in the future, right? I personally don't think those things will happen, but
Right.
that could be an example. So is this crisis accelerating a trend that will hurt your business in the long run? An
Oh,
interesting
yes.
example there is maybe e-commerce and retail, right? So a lot of local brick and mortar retailers are now racing to build an online presence if they don't have one. And I think while some of the e-commerce bump we're seeing is probably temporary as people build home offices and stock up and change their lifestyle for now, some of it might be long-term, right? Like I've heard from a number of friends already that they or their parents placed their first time grocery order online and they had never done that before.
Yeah,
And
we're
they were
building
like,
those new habits, right? That's going to change
exactly.
things.
Exactly. So a lot of those longer term trends are only going to accelerate in a period like this. And so, I think a reason to have that belief that you're going to make it through to a better time is if your business is aligned with long term trends that are only going to get stronger, right? Like when we
Mhm.
talk about it for Tailwind, I think a lot of businesses are going to shift towards digital marketing. I think a lot of people are going to start side hustles and start new businesses. That actually happens a good bit in a recession, usually, especially as folks can't find work. They've got to start something new to bring in income. And so, as we're talking about this internally as a team, we're like, okay, yeah, there are some really strong tailwinds here that are pushing us along that might actually accelerate through this time, even though there are obviously going to be some like economic headwinds that we need to work through
Right.
and help our customers work through at the same time.
Okay, so let's say we've decided that my business is solid, it is providing value and will continue to provide value in the
Mhm.
future. Therefore, it's something that I can and will sustain through this recession. I will come out on the other side. What are some common pitfalls that could prevent that from happening?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is people. Well, two things. People stop, right? They just stop. I just can't. I can't do more. I'm overwhelmed. You've got to figure out how to pull yourself back from that sense of overwhelm, center yourself, and figure out how to be in a productive mindset. Even if you're doing a third in a day of what you would have done before, that's better than doing nothing, right? Like keep moving, keep pushing yourself forward. I think the other thing is people cut too deep in their business. And a lot of times that's because they don't differentiate between sort of like fat and muscle, so to speak, right? Like you want to cut down on fat, you don't want to cut muscle, right? To the extent you can avoid that. Sometimes it's inevitable that you have to hit the muscle a little bit and hurt your actual strength of your business. But if you can avoid that and really only reduce things that are excess or that are nice to haves, that are luxury expenses, you're going to be better off. So there's a link in that page to a worksheet that we put together that it really focuses on identifying and defining your business's top assets, right? And I think that's really important here to avoid hitting the muscle instead of just cutting fat. And so when I talk about assets, I'm thinking broadly, right? Like obviously cash and inventory and receivables that you can collect on, for money you're owed. Those are typical assets. Your team is an asset, whether that's a full-time team or an extended team or a community. Your clients are an asset. Those relationships are assets that you want to maintain and figure out how to strengthen, even if they're not generating revenue right now. Your audience is an asset. Your traffic funnels are an asset. Your content is an asset. Your products are assets. Your
Your
knowledge and
brand.
skills,
Yeah.
yeah, your brand is an asset, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what a lot of people will do in these times is, and the worksheet kind of walks you through this. And again, it's a free download, no email gating, none of that garbage. But it walks you through it and say, okay, for your specific business, let's start by identifying your assets and let's identify the most important ones. And even if you are going to be in a tough time where it's going to be really hard to generate additional revenue right now from those assets, but you believe your business is going to come back when this thing bounces back, then I think your focus goes to how can I strengthen my assets now? How do I invest in those assets within my means so that when things come back, I'm in a stronger position? So, some examples of this is keep creating content, right? Like, why do I say keep creating content? Think about all the hard work you've done to build up SEO traffic on Google, on Pinterest, wherever. If you just stop creating content and your site takes a hit as a result of that, and you take a hit in the rankings as a result of that, you've now cut into muscle, right? Like you have lost some of the strength of your business. And when things come back, you're going to have to rebuild that, while your competitors potentially maybe were doing that all along, and now they're outranking you where you would have outranked them before. That's an example. Another thing would be with your clients. Maybe a client had to cancel their contract with you right now. How do you keep that relationship really strong, right? Like, how do you avoid reacting emotionally, even though it can be really emotional? And how do you say, hey, I understand, I still care about you, I'd like to work with you again in the future? Do you touch base with them every week just to see how they're doing, right? How do you invest in that, right? If you're in a position where you unfortunately have to let people go or sever relationships with freelancers or contractors for the time being, how do you do that in a really kind and respectful way that's empathetic, where you can resume that relationship and they're going to be willing to work with you again in the future, right? So different types of assets, I think you can build in different ways. Knowledge and skill. A lot of people start educating themselves on new skills, start practicing new skills in their free time. But you can keep investing in these things, and you should, even if the immediate return is lower, as long as you believe the long-term return is going to be there. That's what
Yeah.
businesses do well who win recessions, right? Like they're the ones who perform exceptionally well after the recession, as opposed to falling behind and then not being able to catch up as quickly as those who did continue investing as much as they could.
Yeah. So I find a lot of times peers in your same industry, Facebook groups that you're in can be really helpful in helping you make a non-emotional decision about some really hard things. But
Yep.
we also want to help where we can. So we're very interested to know in the comments, or if you want to email us, like, what can we bring to you? And if we're not the experts, we'll go find somebody who is. Like, let us know how we can support you, how we could create a community, whatever it is that you need, because we're all in this together.
Yeah, and part of that is, even with this Facebook Live, we wanted to gather questions and thoughts from you. So as we're talking through this, as we go into Q&A, please tell us what you want to learn more about, right? Like if we can put together additional content, additional sessions, maybe we dive deeper on specific markets or industries. Maybe we dive deeper on specific problems, like how do I do cash flow planning, or how do I do an expense analysis, things like that. Let us know what you're struggling with, where we might have, either us specifically or other members of our team might be able to help out if they have that expertise.
So is there anything you want to do before we go into Q&A? We don't have a lot of time left.
I think we could go there. I know we had some more examples
Okay.
of specific businesses, but I don't know if we need to cover all those.
Okay. You
If
guys
people,
let us know if there's
Yeah,
if you
let
want
us
to know
know.
about a certain industry or your own business, like we can brainstorm about that. So
Mhm.
hit us with some questions. And while we're pulling some, well, Jeff's in the background. Thank you, Jeff, for being here and producing the show today. We do have a little something coming up on Thursday at 5 Central, or 5 Eastern, rather. It is a Pinterest get together. So we thought, while we're not able to really get together with our friends in person, we would create a little bit of a party atmosphere to help people. Maybe you've never tried Pinterest marketing. Maybe you've never heard of Pinterest for business. Maybe you've never used Tailwind. We'll give you kind of a head start on that. I know everybody and their brother is telling you, got some extra time? Why not learn to play the piano? So we thought we'd offer, why not learn to use Pinterest for your business. Get some traffic building up while things are a little tough. You'll be good to go when things turn around. So the first half of that is going to be a quick Pinterest and Tailwind setup. And then we're going to pin together. So we're going to create images together using some templates, and we'll show you how to do that. And then we'll do some real-time feedback. You can come on screen if you want. You can share your work. It's going to be just a really fun time together. So we'll continue that twice a week as long as people need it, as long as we want it. We just felt like we needed to do something a little fun. And there will be party favors and things. So if you want to join us, that is the link there. It's a bit.ly link. It is Pinterest, and I cannot read it over into the little controls. It's Pinterest Get Together Setup. So come on over and join us for that. If that sounds like fun to you, if you have better ideas, we're all ears. Let me know. There's also a Facebook group that goes with that, so we can continue that live feedback and conversation, get some support for you as well. Okay, so question from Sheena. Thanks, Gina. Really
Yeah.
appreciate this so much. She's already feeling more optimistic. Can you go back to my question about businesses who launched just before this pandemic? Would love to hear more about how launching a business during a recession can be not such a bad thing. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, actually. Out of most recessions, you end up seeing a lot of really strong businesses created. And I think what, just from my own research and reading over the years, what those businesses have going for them is, when you're starting a business, you're super lean anyway, in most cases, right? Like you don't have a lot of expenses. You're figuring out any way you can to generate income. But what's interesting is as you're going through that, you're going to be aligning with the trends of the day and the trends of tomorrow instead of aligning with the trends of the past. And a lot of times it's harder if your business was aligned with trends that are falling apart right now or changing direction to realign that than it is to just align with the trends that are increasing in the first place, right? So what you end up seeing, and like a lot of really big businesses out there have started in recessions, what you see is if you get that right, if you really key in on that need that people are feeling in the new world, in the new normal, then when the expansion happens, you're really well suited to take advantage of that expansion and grow with it and potentially grow very quickly. The other piece of this, I think, is that it forces you to be super efficient in how you do things. It forces you to spend less. It forces you to not waste money, to not make superfluous purchases. And so a lot of times that results in a company DNA that is just naturally leaner, where you're not going to waste a lot of money. And so those are a couple of things. Maybe a third one that, it's kind of good and bad, but it's bad from a humanity level. It's good for that particular business, is that if you're building your team and hiring in a recession, there's going to be a lot more talent available, right? Because people are not going to have jobs. So that's the bad part, is people are suffering and they don't have jobs. The good part is you might be able to access talent that otherwise never would have even considered joining your team or working with you, because they had good jobs and they were happy with where they were. And so, with the unemployment situation skyrocketing quickly, there's a lot of really talented folks out there where if you need people on your team, they might be willing to take that risk with you in the early days. And obviously, you want to compensate them long term, let them participate in the upside and all of that as a result of doing that. But you might not have even been able to hire those people or get them to work with you in the first place. So those are three reasons, I think, that like sometimes companies built in recessions end up doing really well. But obviously, that doesn't mean it's without struggle, right? Like it's still hard to run any business through a recession, but long term, it might pay off.
Danny, did you know that Uber was started in the last recession?
Yep. Yeah, I
there's
believe
a there's
PayPal.
Yeah, quite a few of the big ones now, and
Yeah,
I think it really points to what you said about being built
yeah,
on the needs of the future, which is a really an excellent point.
yeah. I think Airbnb was too, right? And so, like, in a
I think
recession,
so.
people needed to generate income from their properties, and so yeah,
Yeah,
Airbnb, new business model, right?
gotta admire the creativity. Oh, thanks for coming, Rose. We're hopeful it's helpful to you, and please do let us know what other topics we can cover that would be helpful for you right now. Okay.
Do you have any other
So,
questions?
all right, I think we are at time. So we will scour the comments to see if there are any other questions we can address today, and if not, we'll keep them under advisement for future um, lives if you're interested. But thank you so much, Danny, for being here, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
And I'll just volunteer on behalf of everyone at Tailwind. If you're, a Tailwind member, or even just, even if you're not, and you just need some help brainstorming during this time, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Right, like, our team is here. We care. We want to help you. We've got a lot of really bright folks on the team, and so we want to help. We want to help you get through this. Even if you never end up using Tailwind or subscribing to Tailwind, we just think it's the right thing to do. So we're here.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, everybody.
My pleasure. Bye, all.